The music was supposed to be a soaring symphony, a declaration of forever. For Julian Blackwood, it sounded like the slow, ominous tolling of a bell. He stood at the altar of St. Ignatius Cathedral, a man carved from ambition and old money, his tuxedo a masterpiece of Italian tailoring that felt like a straitjacket. The cathedral ceiling soared above him, a vaulted expanse of stained glass and gilded arches depicting saints and angels who seemed to stare down with judgmental eyes. Each breath he took was a conscious effort, the air thick with the cloying scent of 1,000 white roses and the whispered expectations of 500 guests. These weren't just guests. They were investors, socialites, senators, the creme de la creme of New York society who had come to witness the merger of the decade. This was his crowning achievement, the final, flawless acquisition. The beautiful, vapid heiress, Charlotte Rutherford, standing beside him in a cloud of French lace, was just the living, breathing signature on the contract that would cement his legacy. He tried to focus on her, on the demure blush he knew was painted beneath her veil, on the staggering, generational fortune her father's pharmaceutical empire represented. But his gaze, like a compass needle finding true north, kept snagging on the immense, carved oak doors at the end of the endless scarlet aisle. They were still closed, a barrier holding back his future, or perhaps his past. The organist, a formidable woman with a grip that could crush walnuts, held the final, anticipatory note of Wagner's Bridal Chorus, the sound swelling, pressing down on him, waiting for a signal that refused to come. Julian's heart hammered a frantic, panicked rhythm against his ribs, a trapped bird beating itself against a gilded cage. This wasn't pre-wedding jitters. This was a primal, gut-deep dread that had been coiling in his stomach for weeks, a ghost he had meticulously buried, now scratching at the lid of its coffin. And then the doors began to open. Not the brisk, efficient swing of the wedding coordinator, but a slow, silent, glacial movement that seemed to suck the very air from the room. A figure stood silhouetted against the brilliant afternoon sun, haloed in a blinding, almost divine light. The congregation drew a collective, sharp breath, a unified gasp of confusion. This was not Charlotte's mother giving the signal. This was someone else, a phantom emerging from a forgotten life. The figure took a step forward, and the light resolved into the stark, breathtaking white of a wedding dress. But this was no soft, romantic confection of tulle and lace. This gown was architectural, severe, a masterpiece of silk satin that clung to a form he knew in his bones, a form that haunted his darkest dreams and most secret shames. As she walked into the shadowed nave, the details became terrifyingly clear. The dress was backless, cut with a razor's precision to the base of her spine, and a long, cathedral-length train whispered over the red carpet like a phantom's sigh. And in her hands, she carried not a bouquet of innocent flowers, but a single, blood-red file folder. Julian's world tilted on its axis, the ornate cathedral blurring at the edges. The polished, practiced smile melted from his face like wax under a flame. His blood ran cold, then hot with a flush of shame, then cold again, leaving him clammy and exposed. He took an involuntary step back, his heel catching on the embroidered altar step. A soft, pathetic sound escaped his lips. It was her, Seraphina. Not the gentle artist he had left behind, but a queen of vengeance, walking towards him not as a memory, but as karma, wearing a wedding dress and a smile that held the absolute zero chill of 1,000 winter nights. 7 years earlier, Julian Blackwood's throne was still under construction. He was a junior analyst at the cutthroat hedge fund, Titan Capital, his ambition a live wire that crackled and spat in the sterile, glass-walled office. The city was a chessboard, and he was determined to be a king. Seraphina Mora was the brilliant, quiet sanctuary he'd found in a dingy downtown gallery, a world away from the screaming numbers on his Bloomberg terminal. She is a painter, her soul tuned to a frequency most people couldn't hear. She was the only person who didn't see him as a vessel for potential wealth, but as a man, flawed, driven, and desperately in need of a place to rest. She saw the cracks in his armor and didn't try to fill them with gold. She simply accepted them, often tracing them with her paint-stained fingers as if mapping a beautiful, complex continent. Their love affair was a secret rebellion against the gray world he inhabited. They lived in a small, sun-drenched loft in Brooklyn that smelled perpetually of turpentine, linseed oil, and her signature jasmine tea. Seraphina's art was everywhere, canvases leaning against exposed brick walls, vibrant, emotional splashes of color depicting fractured cityscapes and feelings too raw for words. It was there, on a rug splattered with a history of their passion projects, with the lights of Manhattan winking like distant, cynical stars outside their window, that he had first proposed. It wasn't with a ring, but with a promise whispered into the skin of her shoulder as they lay tangled in sheets, spent and dreaming. "This is just the beginning, my love," he'd said, his voice thick with sleep and a conviction that felt in that moment like absolute truth. He gestured around their humble, beautiful home. "All of this is temporary. I'm going to build an empire for us, and I want you by my side. We'll be partners in everything. You'll never have to wait tables again. You'll have your own gallery, the biggest in Soho, with your name in lights. I'll make the world see your genius. They'll have no choice." Seraphina, her heart a wide-open vessel, had believed him. She was his muse, his confidant, his moral compass. When he worked late, she brought him containers of homemade pasta, often sketching him at his desk, capturing the intense, worried furrow of his brow that he thought made him look powerful, but she saw as a sign of his beautiful, fragile humanity. When a deal went sour and he came home raging, spitting venom about rivals and incompetence, she was the one who would calm him, her quiet, unwavering strength a balm to his frenetic energy. "They don't see what I see, Julian," she'd tell him, her hands framing his face. "They see a shark. I see the king, and kings don't panic. They plan." She was the silent architect of his early confidence, the foundation upon which he was building his fraudulent future. And in the spirit of that sacred partnership, she shared everything with him, including her most precious secret, a proprietary algorithmic trading model she had been developing for 5 years. It was her other masterpiece, a thing of complex beauty born from her unique mind that blended an artist's intuitive pattern recognition with a savant's mathematical rigor. She saw the financial markets not as cold numbers, but as a chaotic, flowing tapestry of human emotion and greed, and she had found a way to code its hidden, predictable rhythms. "It's not finished," she told him one night, her eyes glowing with a creator's fire as she showed him the cascading, elegant lines of code on her laptop screen. They sat on the floor, surrounded by her paintings, a universe of her own making. "But when it is, it could predict market microtrends with an accuracy nobody's ever seen. It's my ticket to buying my own gallery. Our ticket, Julian, to our future. No more answering to anyone. We'll be free." He had looked at the code, then at her, and a dangerous idea, sleek and venomous, had been born in the deepest, most avaricious part of his soul. He saw it immediately, not as her art, not as their freedom, but as his weapon. The ultimate, unassailable edge. It was the key to every door he was desperately trying to kick down. The opportunity to use it came a month later. A senior partner, the legendary and ruthless Alexander Croft, a man whose approval was a currency in itself, took notice of Julian's relentless, almost desperate drive. Over glasses of obscenely expensive cognac in a club that smelled of aged leather and old money, Croft offered him a shot at a lead position on a groundbreaking new project. "We need an edge, Blackwood," Croft had said, swirling the amber liquid, his eyes like chips of flint in a fleshy, impassive face. "Something nobody else has, a paradigm shift, not an increment. Bring me that and the position, the 7-figure bonus, the corner office with the view of the entire goddamn world. It's all yours. Don't bring me excuses. Bring me a miracle." Julian had gone home that night and watched Seraphina sleep, her face a perfect portrait of peace in the moonlight, one hand curled trustingly on his pillow. The war inside him was brief, brutal, and ultimately a massacre of his own morality. His love for her was real, a warm, steady flame. But his ambition was a supernova, hungry to consume everything in its path, even its own light, even its own heart. The memory of Croft's miracle echoed in his head, a siren's call. He knew where to find one. The next day, while she was at her part-time job teaching art classes to underprivileged children, his hands shook with a treacherous cocktail of excitement and shame as he inserted the flash drive and copied her entire hard drive. He felt a sharp, stabbing pang of something ugly, a final, dying flicker of his conscience. But he smothered it with the overwhelming image of his name on the partner's door, the heavy, authoritative weight of a Patek Philippe on his wrist, the deferential nods in the hallway. He presented her life's work as his own, spending a sleepless, feverish weekend repackaging it, changing the fonts, tweaking minor, inconsequential variables to create a veneer of originality. He called it the Blackwood Matrix. Croft was ecstatic. The model was an instant sensation, making the firm tens of millions in its first few weeks. Julian was promoted, celebrated, his name whispered with a new kind of reverence. The corner office became his. The world was finally his oyster, and he told himself the pearl, the power, the status, the win, was worth the grit of his betrayal. He broke up with Seraphina a week after his promotion. He did it in a crowded, deafeningly trendy bistro in Soho, a place he'd chosen specifically because she, a person of genuine emotion, would be unable to make a scene. He used words he'd rehearsed in the mirror of his new penthouse bathroom. Drifting apart, different paths. The person I was with you isn't the person I need to be to get where I'm going. He told her, his voice cold, flat, and terrifyingly final. You were a chapter in my life, Seraphina. A beautiful, passionate, formative chapter. But the book is moving on. It has to. I have to. He would never forget the look on her face. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was a dawning, horrific comprehension that seemed to fracture her very being. Her eyes, usually so warm and expressive, had scanned his face, and he saw the exact moment she connected the dots. His sudden, inexplicable success, the late nights he'd spent studying her notes, her missing research files, his emotional distance over the past month. The betrayal was a physical blow. The color drained from her face, leaving her porcelain pale and fragile. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked at him as if he were a stranger, a dangerous, poisonous animal she had mistakenly let into her home and her heart. You took it, didn't you? She'd whispered, the words barely audible over the clatter of plates and the vacuous buzz of conversation. My model, you stole it. He had the decency to look away, to throw a wad of cash on the table, far more than the check required, a payoff, a pathetic attempt to assuage his guilt. I don't know what you're talking about. You're being dramatic. It's unattractive. Take care of yourself, Seraphina. He walked out, leaving her sitting there, surrounded by the laughter and curated lives of strangers, her own life, her trust, her future, lying in ashes at her feet. He told himself it was for the best, that she was resilient, an artist, used to pain, that she would land on her feet. He buried the gut-wrenching guilt under a mountain of new Savile Row suits, expensive Swiss watches, and the relentless, deafening pursuit of more. He became a ghost in his own life, a hollow man wearing a crown of lies. For years, the lie worked. Julian Blackwood became a titan, a fixture in the financial press. The Blackwood Matrix was the legendary foundation of his empire, the secret engine of every deal, every victory. He bought the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the fleet of obscene sports cars, the sycophantic respect, or at least the terrified fear of his peers. He dated models and socialites, beautiful accessories who asked nothing of his soul and everything of his credit card. He never let anyone get close. Seraphina's ghost was a locked, soundproofed room in the sprawling mansion of his mind, and he had thrown away the key. He heard whispers, of course, that she'd dropped out of the art scene completely, that she'd had a breakdown, been institutionalized, that she'd disappeared from the city altogether. He dismissed them all, a faint, nagging ache that was quickly silenced by the triumphant roar of the stock ticker and the adulation of the crowd. She was part of a past he had not only outgrown, but incinerated in the blast furnace of his ambition. Then he met Charlotte Rutherford. She was pretty, placid, and blessedly uncomplicated, the sole heir to the Rutherford pharmaceutical fortune. She was impressionable and adored him with a shallow, undemanding devotion that asked for nothing of his soul. It was the ultimate corporate merger, the deal of a lifetime. His financial acumen and her generational wealth and social standing. A power couple for the ages, splashed across the pages of Forbes and Vogue. He proposed on a private yacht off the coast of Santorini, a flawless diamond ring worth a small fortune catching the setting sun, and the press ate it up. He had everything. He had one. The ghost was finally, truly gone. Or so he had desperately believed. The walk down the aisle felt like crossing a continent, each step a seismic event in the absolute silence of the cathedral. Seraphina moved with a hypnotic, deliberate slowness, her spine straight, her chin level, her gaze an unbreakable laser locked on Julian. The silence was a physical presence, a thick, suffocating blanket of shock and anticipation, broken only by the soft, sinister whisper of her satin train slithering over the crimson carpet. She saw the kaleidoscope of emotions on his face, the initial, uncomprehending shock, the swift denial, the dawning, stomach-churning terror, and it was a balm on a wound that had festered for 7 years. This was the moment she had rebuilt herself for, cell by cell, with vengeance as her DNA and justice her only goal. She had planned this moment with the precision of a military campaign and the soul of an artist. Every tear she had cried into her pillow, every sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling of a roach-infested studio apartment, every moment of soul-crushing despair when she thought she would shatter into a million irreparable pieces, had been fuel for this single, exquisite act of reckoning. She had not broken. She had been shattered, and then, with unimaginable will, she had collected the sharp, painful pieces and reassembled herself into something new, a woman of tempered steel and glacial ice. The gentle, trusting artist was gone, and in her place stood a living monument to consequence. After he left her at that bistro, she had indeed disintegrated. For months, she was a ghost, moving through her life in a numb, gray haze. The art died in her, the vibrant colors that had once defined her world drained away, leaving everything in monochrome. She stopped painting. The smell of turpentine, once the scent of creation, now made her physically ill. But then, from the depths of that numbness, the anger came. Not a hot, raging, uncontrollable fire, but a cold, clean, purposeful anger that settled deep in her bones, a new skeleton to support her. It was that anger that led her to a public library computer, where she saw the headlines in a glossy financial magazine. Wunderkind Julian Blackwood's revolutionary matrix reshapes modern finance. There was his picture, smug, successful, and utterly remorseless, standing in his corner office, a trophy she had unknowingly handed him. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she made a plan. It became her new masterpiece, her Sistine Chapel ceiling of retribution. She used the last of her meager savings to hire a ruthless, discreet lawyer named Arthur Bragg, a man with the morals of a great white shark and a personal, burning vendetta against corporate thieves who preyed on creators. She went back to school, not for art, but for finance and advanced computer science, mastering the very cold, logical world he had used to destroy her warm, creative one. She became a ghost in the machine, a digital phantom tracking his every move, his every deal, his every public lie, building an unassailable legal and factual case while she rebuilt her own psyche from the ground up. She worked grueling double shifts, waitressing by night and studied by day, existing on cheap coffee and pure, undiluted determination, her goal a fixed, cold star in the utter darkness of her existence. She knew about Charlotte Rutherford long before the engagement was announced in the Times. She had studied the pattern of his life, his relentless, pathetic climb toward legitimacy and old money, and she knew this wedding was his endgame, the final, gleaming brick in his fraudulent castle. And so, she had decided, it would be hers, too. The wedding dress was her magnum opus, her final canvas. It was a weapon, chosen with the same meticulous care she once used to select brushes. She had designed it herself, every seam, every fold, a declaration of war. The severe, architectural lines were a mockery of the fluffy, insipidly romantic gowns of women like Charlotte. It was a dress of judgment, not joy, of reckoning, not romance. The blood-red folder in her hand was her truth, her evidence, the blade she would use to gut him in front of the very audience whose approval he craved more than oxygen. She finally reached the altar. She stopped a few feet from him, a sculptor regarding a flawed piece of marble. She ignored the gaping, horrified priest, the ashen-faced parents, the frozen, mannequin-like figure of Charlotte, who seemed to have short-circuited. The entire congregation was a gallery of stunned statues, their expensive finery suddenly feeling cheap and ridiculous in the face of real, raw drama. Julian found his voice, a strangled, desperate croak that was barely recognizable. "Seraphina, what are you doing here?" He took a step towards her, a placating, pathetic gesture that reeked of pure panic. "This is a mistake, a terrible mistake. This is my wedding." Seraphina's smile was a razor cut, thin and bloodless. "Is it, Julian? I was under the impression it was ours." Her voice, clear, resonant, and steady, carried to the very back of the cathedral, bouncing off the silent saints and weeping angels in the stained glass. A wave of confused, excited murmurs rippled through the crowd, a rising tide of scandal. Camera phones, previously discreet, were now held aloft like a digital forest, recording every humiliating second. "What are you talking about?" he hissed, his face a terrifying mask of fury and terror. He glanced frantically at the stony-faced Rutherford family. "You need to leave. Now, you're ill, you're causing a scene. Security." "Oh, I wouldn't do that," Seraphina said, her tone deceptively conversational, yet laced with tempered steel. She held up the red folder like a priest offering a bitter sacrament. "Not unless you want me to give this to your new father-in-law. It makes for fascinating reading. It details, with cryptographic timestamps and digital footprints a child could follow, the creation of the so-called Blackwood matrix. Its original core files were created on my computer, Julian, 3 full years before you presented it. The algorithm is written in a unique artistic coding language I developed. You remember, the one you said looked like pretty gibberish while you were stealing it. My lawyer, Mr. Bragg, has the original hardware. He's had it secured in a vault for 6 years, waiting for a sufficiently public stage. This one will do nicely." Julian's face went from pale to a sickly, clammy gray. He felt the laser-like eyes of Charles Rutherford, Charlotte's formidable, old-money father, burning into him. He could feel the entire edifice of his empire, his carefully constructed life of lies, teetering on the edge of a very public, very deep precipice. The corner office, the penthouse, the cars, they all seemed to shrink, revealed as the flimsy, pathetic stage props they always were. "You're lying," he whispered, but the conviction was gone from his voice, replaced by the hollow, frantic thrum of pure terror. It was a plea, a child's desperate denial in the face of incontrovertible truth. "Am I?" Seraphina turned slightly, addressing the congregation now, her voice rising, filled with a tragic, powerful emotion that captivated the silent church. She was no longer just talking to Julian. She was performing her autopsy on his character for the whole world to witness. "Most of you don't know me. My name is Seraphina Morrow. 7 years ago, Julian Blackwood loved me. He lived with me in a small, unheated apartment in Brooklyn where we dreamed big dreams on a shoestring budget. He shared my bed and my dreams, and he promised me a future." She turned her gaze back to him, and the raw, unhealed pain in her eyes was finally, fully visible, a wound that had been kept open for years, tended by hatred. "He asked me to be his partner, in everything, and I, like a fool who believed in the goodness of the man I loved, believed him. I shared everything with him. My heart, my life, my soul, and my life's work. A financial model I had spent 5 years creating, born from my 2 greatest passions, art and mathematics." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the crowd like a leaden pall. "He stole it," she stated, the stark simplicity of the words making them all the more devastating. "He copied my files while I was out teaching children how to finger paint, presented my work as his own, and it became the foundation of everything he has." She gestured with a slow, sweeping hand to the opulent cathedral, to his hand-stitched tuxedo, to the faces of the rich and powerful who had come to anoint him. All of this gilded spectacle, this merger, was built on a lie. On my broken back and my stolen dreams, he got his empire, and he left me with nothing but the burning, all-consuming need to see one thing, justice. "She's insane," Julian blurted out, turning to Charlotte, to her father, his eyes wide and wild with panic. He was grasping at straws, and everyone in the room could see it. "She's a scorned woman, a pathetic, jealous ex-girlfriend making up vile stories. She has no proof. She's just bitter." "This," Seraphina said, tapping the folder gently against her palm like a judge's gavel pronouncing a death sentence, "is the proof. A curated collection of emails between us discussing the model's theoretical development. Dated schematic drawings in my own hand. The sworn, notarized testimony of a Nobel laureate in economics who has verified the code's unique authorship and its direct lineage to my academic and artistic research. It's all here. Enough for a civil suit that will claw back every single penny he has ever earned from it, with interest. Enough for the SEC and the Justice Department to file a sweeping case of criminal charges including intellectual property theft, wire fraud, and perjury. The statute of limitations, Julian, hasn't run out. It's been told, paused, waiting patiently for this very moment. She took a final, decisive step closer to him, so close he could smell the faint, haunting scent of jasmine that still clung to her, a ghost from their past life that now smelled like funeral flowers. "You told me I was a chapter, Julian," she said, her voice dropping to an intimate, devastating whisper that was meant only for him, yet it carried in the breathless, rapt silence. "But you were wrong. You were the prologue to my vengeance. And today—" She looked down at the stark, blinding white of her wedding dress, then back into his terrified, hollow eyes, forcing him to see the monster he had created. "Today is our wedding day. The day I finally become the woman you forced me to be. The day you learn, in your bones, that every debt, no matter how long forgotten, eventually comes due." With a final, contemptuous glance that stripped him bare, she turned her back on him. She walked, steady and sure, towards Charles Rutherford, who was standing now, his face a thundercloud of boiling fury and profound humiliation. She held out the red folder, not as a supplicant, but as an equal delivering a verdict. "This is for you, Mr. Rutherford," she said, her voice clear, calm, and utterly devoid of any plea or hysteria. It was a simple statement of inescapable fact. "Consider it a due diligence report on your future son-in-law. I suggest you read it very, very carefully before you merge your daughter's future and your company's legacy with a common thief and a fraud." The dam of silence shattered. The cathedral erupted into a cacophony of gasps, shouts, and the frantic, hungry clicking and whirring of camera phones. The journalists, initially present for a bland society wedding, now scrambled over pews for a better angle, their voices rising in a clamor of sensational questions. Julian stood utterly frozen at the altar, a man completely and publicly unmasked and destroyed. He saw Charlotte rip off her veil, her face, once pretty and placid, now contorted into a mask of utter betrayal and furious humiliation. "You used me," she screamed, her voice shrill and piercing over the din. "Was any of it real? Was I just another acquisition? Another line item?" He saw Charles Rutherford snatch the folder from Seraphina, his eyes, cold and calculating even in his rage, already scanning the first damning page, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked violently, a telltale sign of a deal gone catastrophically wrong. He was surrounded by the ruins of his life, the smoke and debris of his own making now choking him. The money, the status, the hollow respect, it was all evaporating before his eyes, burned away by the unforgiving, brilliant light of the truth, delivered by the one woman he had ever truly loved and so profoundly wronged. Seraphina didn't look back. She turned and walked back down the aisle, her head held high, the train of her wedding dress flowing behind her like a banner of victory in a war he never knew they were fighting. She walked through the chaos she had orchestrated, through the stunned, pale faces and the rising, gleeful din of the greatest society scandal of the decade. She didn't hurry. She savored it. The whispers now were about her. Who is she? My God, is it true? The nerve, the brilliance, the sheer audacity. She pushed open the heavy cathedral doors and stepped out into the bright, cleansing, afternoon sun. A sleek black sedan was waiting at the curb, Arthur Bragg inside. He gave her a grim, deeply satisfied nod. There were no tears. There was only a profound, echoing silence within her, a quiet so deep and complete it was louder than any applause. The ghost was finally at peace. The debt was paid in full. Seraphina Mara was free. Inside, Julian crumpled. The strength left his legs as if the bones had vanished, and he fell to his knees on the hard altar steps, the fine wool of his trousers scraping against the cold, unyielding stone. The whispers of the crowd were no longer admiring. They were the hissing of 1,000 snakes, the judgment he had spent his entire life running from now closing in for the kill. He heard the sharp, final, disgusted tone of Charles Rutherford's voice as he barked orders to his personal security team. "Get him out of here, now, before I do something I'll regret." He saw Charlotte, his ticket to a dynastic legacy, being forcibly ushered away by her weeping, furious mother, who shot him a look of such pure, unadulterated hatred it felt like a physical blow to his chest. He was alone. Truly, utterly alone for the first time since he had walked out of that sun-drenched, paint-splattered loft in Brooklyn. The memory of it, of Seraphina's trusting smile, of the smell of turpentine and jasmine, of the feel of her skin under his hands, the sound of her laughter. It all crashed over him with the force of a tsunami, washing away the last fragile vestiges of his denial. He had traded that real, breathing, messy, beautiful, true love for this. A gilded cage whose doors had just been blown off their hinges, revealing the hollow, pathetic, and utterly bankrupt man inside. He had thought, with the arrogant certainty of the damned, that he was building an empire. He had only been building a prison of his own vanity, and Seraphina had just handed him the key, forged in the fires of his own betrayal. Karma had not come for him as a sudden crash or a silent, private tragedy. It had arrived slowly, patiently, intelligently, its heart beating in time with his own rising success. And on the day of his greatest, most public triumph, it had walked down the aisle, wearing a wedding dress, looked him in the eye, and recited his sins for all the world to hear. And in that moment, on his knees before God and everyone, Julian Blackwood knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his soul, that he would never, ever be whole again.